Welcome everybody to Dharma Punx Seattle. Today, or about a month ago, I posted on Instagram to solicit some topics for future Dharma Punx groups, and there were some pretty cool topics that people came back with, and I felt like I've been gone for a month, and coming back with the topic that someone came up with, which is as a statement, why Buddhism is punk as fuck. I think coming back, it kind of feels a little bit like a new beginning in Dharma Punx. There's some cool stuff in the works that will be revealed in due time, and it feels like this topic kind of brings me back to my roots in the practice, where I came from, and how I initially got into Buddhism. You know, the name of this group is called Dharma Punx. It's named after Noah Levine's book. But I think the whole concept that originated from that book and that ethos that Noah Levine sort of came up with was this idea of the way that Buddhism has this natural sort of countercultural mechanic to it that, I mean, that feels maybe a little obvious as, you know, we're sitting here in a church that, you know, our culture is very much Judeo-Christian. It's a little bit harder to find monasteries to sit in, but more just against the status quo of, you know, our governments, our systems, and even just in some ways, our biology. Our biology that from birth, we come out screaming, we come out hungry and hating. And so what the Buddha came up with was this whole theory, essentially, that helps us rewire, that helps us orient to a different way that I feel like some people have said in the past that we still have these old brains that, you know, we've come into this modern era, so much technology has advanced, but our brains haven't really advanced to catch up with that. And in some ways, I feel as though Buddhism kind of helps give a little software update, help us catch up with, you know, the rise of social media and fucked up food that is horribly processed, and corrupt governments, and you know, from a brain that just wants to pick berries. So yeah, I came to Buddhism not really wanting to be a Buddhist by any stretch of the matter. I was very anti-religion when I was younger, and still am. But I always had this sense that something was wrong. I mean, in a lot of things at the time, you know, when I first discovered Buddhism, you know, there was a lot of stuff wrong. I was a teenager, you know, strung out on drugs, and dealing with a lot of difficulty in my family life, and so I can remember when I met these people who, listened to this type of music that like introduced me into some political views in the punk rock scene that really started to give me some words to the things that I was going through, be it emotional or, systemic. I felt like there was something that was finally saying the things that were on my heart, that other people were seeing that something was fucking wrong, because I felt like, up until that point, my parents sure made me feel invisible. There wasn't a sense of the people around me in my family, and even my friends, that felt like there was space to really talk about the things that were difficult. And I feel like that's just such a common experience people have in this culture, right? That if you're not happy, something's wrong with you. If you're tired, something's wrong with you. If you're too energetic, something's wrong with you. That if you're not in this like perfect, eased state, despite anything that is going on in your life, a death, trauma, that there's something wrong with you. And having that space and that outlet was really the first time that I felt like I could begin to express. But I think, as maybe, if anybody else might be able to relate, there is a sense of having lived even in, alternative cultures for a period of time, who care about systemic change, who care about mental health, and nothing really actually happening at a certain point, right? Like we get these, it's like the Sisyphus boulder that we, we're constantly like trying to roll this boulder, and and I don't want to say that has made me or the people in my life jaded. I think that there's just some level of fact that, perhaps the youthful optimism that like me am gonna like be the revolutionary that changes fucking everything, just kind of met reality. And so I had to come to terms with, okay, what do I do with that? What do I do when, I still want to be out here, I still want to be creating positive change in the world, but my ability and my access to do so is so limited, given, what Buddhism calls ignorance, and ignorance not being just, dumb people, but people like myself even, who are operating from a system of greed, hatred, and delusion. And that was what really spoke to me with Buddhism, was me being able to see that, and that was what I heard so much in the punk scene, right? Was like, ignorance in the world, right? And I felt like coming to practice, being able to try to begin to have a new answer. And maybe that doesn't look like, you know, a revolutionary, like, tear down of, you know, the government and, you know, all of this reconstructing that I hoped for in my younger years. But I have so much more faith in the idea of what can happen in community, something that, again, in our individualistic culture, I feel like a lot of people are really alienated from community and don't necessarily know its value. Even in family, like I can remember in elementary school when you had to like name all your favorite things, like family coming in at the like 10th on the list, but like kind of as more of like an obligated, like I kind of just like have to put it there, otherwise like maybe my teacher will judge me or something, like and the ripple effect that I've been able to witness in the years of my of engaging in this practice, of what happens when you meet somebody face to face and they have that shift and it changes the trajectory and they create change, and seeing how that ripple effect does slowly create positive change in our communities and in the world. And I have a really strong belief in that the more that I commit to this practice and I commit to waking up, that too will have a ripple effect on the people around me, even if they're not wanting to engage in this practice. And so that's going to be a little bit of the topic today. The rest of the talk will get into the fire sermon. Some people might be familiar with the fire sermon, but it's one of the Buddha's earliest teachings. And to give a little overview, it's where he talks about we are all burning, essentially, with greed, hatred, and delusion. And not seeing, and I think that's one of the things that is easy for me to do when I'm relating to people in the world who I could be like, that person's ignorant, right? Like that person has greed, that person has hatred, that person has delusion. But from the Buddhist perspective, that we all have it in our own, different ways, and that I'm not actually different from the people that I want to call ignorant in a lot of ways, right? That I too carry this burning, this fire. So the discussion question for today will be just talking about maybe the interrelatedness between people. I think it's an important thing to remind myself of. It's really easy for me to, I don't know if this is cultural, but to live an experience where I'm the only person like me. I'm the only person with my kind of problems. I'm the only person with my kind of neuroses. And so there's not really a question as much as just a reminder to ourselves to to reflect on this concept and to talk about it. And so if you're on YouTube, you can meditate on that topic, journal about it. We'll be back in about 5 to 8 minutes.
All right, sounds back on.
All right. Let's meditate. Finding a comfortable way to sit that is upright. An invitation to try a little bit of a different exercise with me if you would like. No pressure, but if on your next inhale you want to scrunch your shoulders up to your ear, and then on the exhale, releasing them, allowing them to sink further in their sockets than maybe usual. Relaxing the jaw, the muscles around the eyes, relaxing any tension that might be being held in the belly. Beginning by noticing the sense doors, ears are hearing sounds from outside, dogs barking, seeing the light reflected off the eyelids, our body, feeling the contacts with the chair, maybe feeling pain in the body. Maybe feeling softness in the body. While we cannot completely remove consciousness from creating perception, voices outside, the noises that we might be hearing, stepping back into the awareness and noticing perception taking form. That without any will of your own, the mind steps in with an explanation. Ajahn Chah once said, "The sound is not bothering you. Why are you going out and bothering the sound?" And similar can be true with all of the other senses, the things we see, the things we taste, smell, the things we think. Why are you bothering the thinking? It's just thinking. might become obvious after watching the sense doors for some time, as you observe the mind's tendency toward perception, that it also quickly categorizes whether something is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. If a thought is good, there's a desire to think more and more and more. Fantasy of what I'm going to eat later. What I'm going to watch when I get home. Or when something comes up that we don't like, quickly trying to push it away. Or even using the thinking mind to investigate. Sometimes we still try to control, fix, manage. We say that's bad. Seeing if you can step back into the awareness, which is different than the conscious thinking mind. The knower, the one who observes. That remains undisturbed by the flittering mind. the silence behind the mind. Behind the sights, the tasting, the smelling. Some people identify the nada sound, a hissing in the ears, often invisible. That goes unnoticed. If you identify with visuals or visualization, remembering that the Buddha said in the fire sermon that the senses were on fire. The tongue, the ear, the eyes, the mind. And so the idea to extinguish the fire, and mindfulness being closer to a white light. A cooling happens. A popular long pour in the Thai force tradition says, warm heart, cool mind. As we near the end of the meditation, taking inventory of what has happened. Where did you begin? Were there any thoughts that your mind gave an absolute on? When you hear the sound of the bell, try not to throw open your eyes and shrug off your meditation. Rather slowly open and bring the meditation with you. We're reflecting on this topic. I asked myself, what was the punkest sutta that the Buddha wrote, and it felt really apparent to me after, kind of doing some thumbing around, that the fire sermon felt up there with that. And, sort of just reflecting on my own relationship to ignorance, in that there have been so many times in my life where I felt I have been able to make a declarative statement of, gosh, I didn't know anything back then, but now I got some shit. And like that just kind of keeps happening year after year after year. And so that being part of the delusion, the Zen people call that willingness to sit in the beginner's mind. Especially, I think, in terms of practice, it can be really easy for us, or it's been really easy for me to feel like I've understood it all. I've read it all. I've listened to numerous talks. And the only thing that has done for me has put a cap on my ability to grow. It's been, I don't know if anybody has had this experience, but sometimes there can be a meditation that I'm in where I feel like I sort of know what the pathway is. I'm like, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And like, it's like there's like a groove in the road. And then at a certain point being like, oh, but what if like I like let go of the idea that I know how this meditation is supposed to go. And being able to see that sometimes like there's even deeper understanding to be had that I hadn't yet discovered. And that will be more applicable because there's a part in this where the Buddha says, seeing thus, which is something that like the Buddha says a lot, seeing thus. And how often just reading something we can comprehend what it says, right? Like we can hear craving happens, and then there's an end to craving and the Eightfold Path, and like we can comprehend that is the case. But this idea of seeing thus, like really understanding something, being able to is different. It's like being able to hear French, like people speaking French, and being able to be like, that's French. But to actually comprehend what they're saying is different. And so I think that when I revisit these stories, like the fire sermon that I've heard 1,000 times, it can always be important for me to come into it with that beginner's mind and ask myself, well, do I still suffer? Because if the answer is yes, then that means I probably haven't fully comprehended the teaching, and to maybe try it again with a beginner's mind. So, preliminary. So the fire sermon is one of the first of the Buddhist teachings. The story happens shortly after the Buddha's enlightenment. If you were to look on the map of like where the Buddha went after his enlightenment, this is not far from Gaya, and the story, this mythological telling, we'll say, because I'm skeptical of its exactness, its truth, but it's a cool story, and the symbolism I think to be very relevant. It's he hears about some ascetics, which is something that was really common in India around that time. These people who were just really into body torture, essentially, right? Just like trying to do the most extreme shit to get enlightened, to get free, to have some sort of spiritual relationship. And, Noah tells this story a lot, and he always like compares them to like burners. So he meets this guy, forget his name. I think it's Ora Vela Kassapa. He's the leader of these ascetics, these fire worshipers, and he can see that they're very spiritually fit, but obviously not very very enlightened, and so he asks Kassapa to join in with them, and so. The sutta, the story, is actually quite long. It becomes this like test of the Buddha's skills in some ways, because later in the suttas, the Buddha doesn't really, people come to him. This is like he's early on, he's like new to enlightenment, and he's like out there ready to like convert some people, I guess. I don't know. But like in a very discreet way. So and I don't know, maybe you've done something like this before where like you're not trying to show off your skills, but you're gonna like subtly do them in front of people and hope they notice. That's what the Buddha was doing to these fire worshipers. And, you know, so like the first story goes like, they have like what do they call it? Like a sweat lodge. There it is. And the Buddha's like, I'd like to sleep in the sweat lodge tonight, if that's cool. And Kassapa tells the Buddha, like, I mean, you could try, but there's a fierce, mean dragon in there. Like, if you would like us to arrange your funeral in the morning, feel free to sleep there. And so the Buddha's like, I got this. And he goes in there and he wakes up, or everybody comes to the sweat lodge in the morning, and the Buddha has just a simple snake in his alms bowl, and the Kassapa is very dismissive, and he's like, well, like that was impressive, but he's not an arahant like me. An arahant is like somebody who's been liberated, who's been enlightened, and so like a series of these kinds of events happen, right? Like there's another one where the fire worshipers are like going to Burning Man, and Kassapa is fearful because like he's been the Buddha has been showing off, or not showing off, but like has been demonstrating a lot of these spiritual prowesses. And the Buddha sort of intuits that this is the case and decides not to go. And so the following day, they all come up to the Buddha and they're like, why didn't you go? And he explains, like, well, I kind of understood that if I came, that Kassapa, that like you thought I would, show you up in front of all your friends. And, even still, like, despite this intuition, despite all of these things that the Buddha has done to sort of subtly demonstrate his attainments, the Kassapa says, well, he's pretty cool, but he's not an arahant like me. And eventually, they finally, he finally gives in, right? Kassapa finally gives in and asks the Buddha for a teaching. He like after enough time, and he says, initially the Buddha's like, well, you have all like 500 followers. 500 other people, ascetics following you. You can't just convert. And all of the worshipers are like, we've liked you for a while. Like let's hear the shit. and so that's they have dreadlocks, and so they all sort of in a ritual shave off their dreadlocks and throw them in the Ganges. And there's 2 more fire tribes downriver on the Ganges, and each tribe has like 300, 200 followers, and they see the dreadlocks drifting down the river, and they come check out what's happening, and that's where the fire sermon comes about. And one of the things that is fascinating if you read the suttas enough is that the Buddha always does a really good job of speaking the language of whoever he's in front of. So if he's a king, if he's talking to a king, he's talking about like the court, right? If he's talking to families, he's talking in terms of families. And so in a big way, what he's done is he's being able to adjust his own language so that way the fire worshipers can actually hear, which I think is a really unique skill, and just a fascinating thing to see done in his lifetime. And so, this is where he gives that famous saying, everything is burning. Your eyes are burning, your ears are burning, your tongue is burning, your body is burning, your mind is burning. Your mind is burning with what? With greed, hatred, and delusion. The process of seeing creates burning. The process of hearing creates burning. The process of thinking, consciousness, creates burning. And so this idea being that through the sense doors, like we did in the meditation, is the beginning of where our suffering often begins, right? That the contact is where we get inflamed. And so one of the things that is also an interesting sort of parallel between this teaching and the concept in Buddhism called nirvana, just freedom, right? The actual not Pali, Sanskrit word nibbana means cooling, and back when Sanskrit was used, it was actually a very common household term that, like, I'm going to take the pot off the burner to nibbana. And so that is also a very interesting parallel between this sutta and the idea of freedom, that it is a cooling of the senses, that it's an extinguishment of the senses. I had to write it down because I knew I wasn't going to remember. So one of the things that he says, right? So he says, seeing thus, right? Understanding, comprehending. The wise become dispassionate toward the senses. Becoming dispassionate, fear and desire fade away. When fear and desire fade away, the heart is released, and there is liberation. This word, dispassionate, I feel it can be a little bit tricky. It's often a word that I read in the suttas and in the teachings, and I am averse to, like many of the words, and have to understand the way that language is not perfect here. And so replacing it with extinguish, and not sort of because I don't think that there's anything wrong with, like, the way we understand passion, right? Like, we're not trying to become like wimpy, like wet noodle type people, right? We're not saying, and thus the wise become wimpy wet noodles. I don't think that's what the Buddha was trying to say. And so, and that can be an interesting way to, if you are ever studying these words on your own and you're seeing a word that's just like dispassionate, that doesn't sound right. Okay, so like what is a synonym that I know to dispassionate? The wise become wimpy wet noodles toward the senses. No. They extinguish. They become less enchanted with the senses. Yeah, that makes more sense to me. Those are words that I can kind of get down with. So we become less enchanted with the senses. I'll end with sort of like where we went in the meditation as sort of the alternative, right? Is the awareness, the seeing thus, the being, where the fear and desire fade away. You know, when he says fear and desire, he just means greed and hatred, where the greed and hatred fade away, where the craving and aversion fade away, is in the awareness, that space that I'm not sure if everybody was able to access that in the meditation. It does take a little bit of time and skill to develop and to understand, but it is a way that we begin to see that there is this, we can create this distance. And by having that step back, having that removal, we have some ability to stop being stuck in those shitty fucking cycles that were, you know, that for me, I have created so much pain, so much extra suffering, that being able to trust, you know, I think that Ajahn Sumedho also often says trust and awareness. And if you have been able to access that space, that can be an interesting place to explore, is what does trust and awareness mean? What does that look like? And if I'm caught up in the thinking mind, getting caught up in the craving and the aversion, am I trusting that more? Am I more inclined to believe and, you know, be seduced by something that I know is going to create suffering? And so just seeing for yourself, the experimenting in that space can lead to a lot of ease, or as it says, the heart is released. So, questions, comments, meditation, any thoughts on the meditation? Okay. Easy peasy. All right, then Donna, this is a freely offered situation. If you would like to donate, however, you can donate via Cash App or Venmo. You can throw cash in the bowl. Yeah. I'll save the announcements. I won't get too ahead of the game. It's good to be back, though. It's good to see everybody. So, yeah, if you would like to send merit, you can. If invitation to put your hands together in Anjali, no pressure. We send this merit to all those still suffering, including ourselves, to above and below, to the seen and the unseen, to those being born and those who are dying.